Hello, Velomobile fans. In today's beginners episode, we're going to talk about gearing. One of the two most common things that I spend a lot of time with clients on is gearing, and the other, of course, is picking your color, which we discussed in the last video. So in simple terms, gearing determines how fast you're going to be able to ride your Velomobile and how easy it is to go up hills. So the first thing we're going to think about is what kind of rider are you and where are you going to be riding? For instance, the gearing I would advise for someone who's a speed demon and can put out 200-300 watts is completely different from someone who wants to just go leisure riding on a rail trail. It can be really helpful to take a look at the gearing you have on whatever bike you might currently be riding, especially if that bike happens to be a recumbent trike. Generally, recumbents will end up needing a little bit lower gearing just because we're a little bit heavier than a lot of upright bikes, and we have a tendency to climb a little bit slower just because we're laying in a recumbent position and we're not able to use our body as leverage and weight when climbing. With a Velomobile, of course, because we're so aerodynamically efficient, we also tend to need a little bit more high end because we'll run out of gears pretty quickly. On a bike, a 52 for a big ring is considered pretty big and is almost more gears than most people can use, whereas on a Velomobile like the Bulk, a 60-tooth big ring can actually be pretty easily exceeded just by a slight downhill gradient of maybe 2 or 3%. For that reason, we end up often needing a really big spread of gears. For instance, in my W9 that I used when I toured in Europe in the mountains, I had a 60 big ring and a 33 small ring with an 1140 cassette in the rear, which is a massive spread. Here at home with my own Bulk, I ride a 60-36 with an 1140 cassette. That gives me a low gear inch of 22.3 in the W9 and 24.3, I think, in the Bulk. Now, don't worry if you don't know what gear inches mean. They're only included here as a way to compare the different gearing systems. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to set the scenarios up today with the same gearing. We're going to put a 700C rear wheel, which is 622 for those of you in Europe, and we're going to assume that the person is riding a Bulk because that's the model we sell the most of. We're going to put a 32 millimeter tire on the rear, and we're going to set them up with 150 millimeter cranks. Our first candidate is Ted. Now, Ted has decided that he's going to start commuting by bike. His doctor says he needs to get more exercise. He's getting tired of paying the high cost for gas and for parking at work. So he figured a Velomobile seemed like a pretty good solution. Good weather protection, better efficiency. Now, his commute is 20 miles with maybe at most a 5 or 6% gradient, and it's a pretty short hill, so he doesn't need a really massive low end, but he does want to have enough high end so that he can cruise well. So what Ted's going to do is he's going to go with an 11-speed system with 2 chain rings in the front, and he's going to opt for a 60-36 in the front and an 11-36 in the back. That means Ted's high end, if he pedals 80 to 100 RPM, is between 35 and 44 miles per hour, which will give him a real nice clip heading down the other side of that hill. And with that 36 small ring in the front and the 36 in the rear, he's going to have enough to get him up that 5 to 6% gradient. And if he were to ever, say, go touring, he'd have enough low end that he could do some shorter, steeper hills too. Our next candidate is Sarah. Now, Sarah and her husband both recently retired, and he's been riding Velomobile for a while. And she's been thinking, that looks like an awful lot of fun, and she's not really enjoying riding her trike in the winter very much because, well, it's cold. And she feels kind of jealous of her husband when he goes out on rainy days riding. So she's decided it's time to become a Velonaut. Now, she and her husband mostly ride rail trails, and if they did any touring together, it would probably be on rail trails as well, just because it's just such a nice, peaceful place to ride. So she's not going to need a very big range of gears, but she does want to have something just in case they should venture off a rail trail and maybe encounter a small hill or there, here or there. So what Sarah's going to opt for is a 2-by in the front, an 11-speed system, and because she doesn't need that really big high end, she's going to go with a 56 big ring and a 33 small ring, and then she'll put an 1136 cassette in the rear. That'll give her a high end of 33 to 41 miles per hour, which is more than she really ever plans to go. And with that 24.8-inch low, which is the same as I have in my book, she can get up most of the hills that she'll ever find. Next up is Tom. Tom lives in the mountains. In fact, it's so mountainous that all his friends have e-bikes. And Tom's been considering that as an option because he knows that he can get a 250-watt electric assist system installed in his book. But for now, he wants to try going fully human power. Now, in order to get up those steep hills, Tom's decided that what he's going to do is go with a Schlumpf mountain drive. With the Schlumpf drive, he'll be able to have a 2.5 to 1 reduction in the gearing, which means he'll be able to drop his low end really, really low. Now, Tom has been debating between a 60 and a 65, or actually a 60, 63, or 65 tooth big ring. With the 60 tooth, his low end will be 18 inches, which is incredibly low. With the 65, he would get 19.5 gear inches, and with the 70, he's going to get 21 gear inches, all of which are well below what I've used when I toured in the Alps, which means he can basically crawl up those hills. The other cool thing about the Schlumpf is he's still going to have the same high end that he would have if he used a traditional derailleur system. So that means he can go down the other end of those hills pedaling at least up to around 44 miles per hour. In fact, if he put a 65 tooth ring on there, he could pedal at 55 miles per hour at 100 RPM. However, Tom also knows that the faster you pedal, the more it affects the handling, and so he's not so sure he really wants to pedal at 100 RPM. So he's going to end up going with the 60 tooth big ring. That way he's got more than enough low end to absolutely crawl up hills at a pretty slow speed. Next up is Art. Art likes to tour. He's retired now. In fact, he retired recently, and his wife thinks that he's not got enough hobbies, and he looks like he's pretty bored. So she's decided that this summer he needs to go on a nice 2-week tour. So he's decided he's going to do that in a Velomobile because, 1, weather protection, and 2, cargo capacity. And the beautiful thing about that cargo capacity is it won't impact his aerodynamics. Plus, what's more convenient than having all your snacks and drinks right next to you in the bike instead of buried in your bags? Now, Art plans on doing a pretty varied course, and he knows he's going to encounter some hills along the way. And he wants the convenience of the Schlumpf drive as well, because if he happens to hit an unexpected hill, he can pop into that low end without having to deal with shifting down with a derailleur and completely letting up on the pedals so he doesn't jack his derailleur. Art's going to opt to do the same thing Tom did and go with that 60 tooth ring so that he gets that 18-inch low gear. That way, when he's got all that heavy gear with him, he can pop down into a really low gear and just slowly spin up the mountain and enjoy the scenery. Brett likes to go fast, but he lives in an area with some short hills of somewhere between 6 and 9%. Brett's going to opt to go with a 60 tooth big ring and a 36 small, and he's going to try an 1140 cassette. Now, he knows that 1140 cassette doesn't shift quite as smoothly as an 1136, but having that extra low end will make those hills a lot easier. Now, with that 60 tooth ring in the front, he'll be able to go somewhere between 35 and 44 miles per hour in his highest gear, depending on how fast he pedals, and his low end will give him a 24.3 gear inch low. So that's plenty enough to get up the hills. Then we have Fred. Fred's been retired now for a little while, and he's been riding trike. But as the weather gets bad and it starts to get cold, it's not so motivating to get out on that trike, and his doctor says he needs to be riding really every day to stay in shape and stay healthy. Now, Fred rides mostly rail trails and occasionally some nice wide shoulders on roads, so he doesn't need anything too extreme for gearing, but he does want to have the option for some low end just in case he go someplace where he might have to go over a highway overpass or something. So he's going to opt for a 2x11 speed system with a 56 big ring and a 33 small ring. He'll still be able to pedal 33 to 41 miles per hour depending how fast he pedals in his high gear, though he doesn't really plan on ever going quite that fast. And he'll still have that nice 24.8-inch low gear, which is the same low gear that I have on my Buick. That'll get him up the small gradients that he'll encounter, and it might make it a little bit easier for him to get going from a stop as well. Our last candidate is Joel. Joel is an engineer, and he just turned 30, and for his birthday, he's decided he's going to get himself a Velomobile. When he was in high school, he did some racing, and he was a pretty good, strong rider, but he got away from it in college and got busy with life. But now he wants to get back into it, and he's been doing some research on bikes and ran across the idea of Velomobiles, and he really likes the idea of the high efficiency. He lives in an absolutely pan-flat area, and his goal is to go as fast as possible. So what he's going to do is go for a 12-speed system with a single chainring in the front. And then he'll do an 1139 cassette in the back. The advantage with that 1139 cassette with 12 speeds is that he's got the gears pretty close together, which will give him a really nice cruising gear. Now he's going to opt to go with a massive dinner plate 70-tooth front chainring because, again, he wants to go fast. In fact, with that 70-tooth chainring, if he's pedaling between 80 and 100 RPM in his highest gear, he'll be able to go 41 to 51 miles per hour. Now, Joel might not be completely the most reasonable person because that is a pretty fast speed to go on the flat, but he's optimistic that he's still pretty strong. Now, his low end is only going to be 48.5 gear inches, which isn't very low, but he figures he's got enough strength in his legs that he can get that going. So there you have it. There's our 7 case studies. And while these are only generalizations, it should give you some ideas of typical gearing situations. Of course, the best way to make sure that you get the right gearing for you is to set up a consultation. And you can do that through the link here on the screen. Well, don't click it on the screen, but you can find the link to click down in the description, or you can just type into your web browser the link here below on the screen. I'd be happy to talk to you about your use case scenario and what gearing will work best for you. As always, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!